Hello everyone, and thank you for joining for this webinar. My name is Harlan Sandoniu, and I'm the Environmental Suppliers Officer at MCTC. And today we'll be focusing on single-use plastics and how we can phase them out of the supply chain and in general from our lives. Today's presentation will include a brief history about plastics, what is the current situation on the legislation and global movements when it comes to reducing plastics, and what we aim to do as MCTC, and what we expect from suppliers to do to combat this problem. I would like to mention that at the end of this presentation, a Q&A session will follow. And you can write your any questions you might have during the presentation in the chat room. The chat icon is located at the far up slide, toolbar slide, next to the people's icon. Just press that, and actually you can write any questions you might have there, and then I'll go through it at the end of the presentation and try to reply as accurately as possible. Now, I hope everyone hears me loud and clear. Okay. The history of plastics. Actually, the first plastic that was created, it was in the form of bakelite, and it was the first fully synthetic plastic that was ever created, which means it didn't contain any molecules that were found in nature. It was fully synthetic, that was made in the lab. It was a combination of phenol and formaldehyde. Phenol is actually a byproduct of coal tar. That's why we say plastics are petroleum-based. And it was actually produced to cover the needs of the rapidly expanding energy industry in the US. Actually, it was produced as an insulator for electric cables. The purpose was to prevent fires from shortages. It was very popular because it was very inexpensive, safe to use, very sanitary, and humans could shape it at any form they could imagine. During the 1900s, people, of course, were unaware of the ecological problems, and there was no actual recycling initiatives up to the late 70s. Bakelite actually something interesting. Some interesting facts is that it turned out the outcome of the World War II and was considered one of the most innovative products ever created, because soldiers had the capability to have plastic items such as water canteens or gun protectors, helmet liners, even parachutes made out of plastic, and USA could rapidly produce them, and some people argue that it overturned the outcome of World War II. These are some of the common items that they were produced back at that time. In the middle, we can see a very familiar image of everyone. It's an old telephone, which I believe we all, at some point of our lives, we all came across this device, and a water canteen on the left-hand side, and so, some of them are even found today. After 100 years, you can still find them. They are still available. Moving on. This slide shows the plastic trend. On the right-hand side, we see the population growth, in billions. So now we are approximately a little bit more than 8 billion. And on the left-hand side, you can see the billions of tons produced each year. Right after World War II, we can see a linear production of single-use plastics, but then we see an exponential growth. It's worth mentioning that in just 60 years, the production has grown by 300 times, and about half of all plastic was produced in the last 15 years. Due to the market demands, population growth, there was a huge expansion in the plastic production industry. Something worth mentioning is, as you can see in this orange line, it shows where laws were introduced. So it shows where, in which year legislation was produced that actually had an effect, an impact on the single-use plastics problem. So we can see legislation was mainly introduced in the last 20 years. Before that, there was no control, no legal framework that was forbidding from companies from using or producing single-use plastics and without any special requirements. Now things have changed, so we're going to talk a little bit about it in the next slides. As I mentioned at the beginning, feel free to write any questions you may have in the chat, and I will address them after the presentation. Now, moving on, the plastic curves. In the image, you can see one of the developing countries of the world, and this is an image that we see very frequently because plastics find its way into our water systems in the river bodies and estuaries, and these systems usually found their way into the sea. And because of sea currents, usually they washed up on the beaches. And we get images like that. Even in high developed countries, this is very common to see. Even in Cyprus, in some remote beaches that are not cleaned up very frequently, we do see images like that. Now, I want to focus a little bit more on single-use plastics, which quite differentiate from multi-use plastics. By definition, single-use plastic products are made wholly or partly of plastic and are typically intended to be used just once for a short period of time before they are thrown away. In comparison with multi-use plastics, single-use plastics have a very short lifespan, and they are not expected to be used for many times. And as we can see in the following slide, there are 6 major plastic polymers for single-use plastics, and around 70% of the global production is concentrated in these 6 major polymers. The most commonly produced item is water bottles, which are made of polyethylene, low-density polyethylene. And water bottles are made out of this plastic because it holds its integrity well when it holds water, and in its structure, it's sturdy enough to not to leak or have any issues when storing water. Now, the second most used is PVC, which is responsible for many household products such as plumbing pipes, clear food packaging, shrink wraps, many children's toys. And the next one is high-density polyethylene. This is mainly used for detergents because these 6 different resins have different properties, and each product is categorized according to its humidity, to its pH, to its erosion grade. So it needs to the container that holds a specific problem needs to be made by a specific resin. And on the next slide, we can actually see that the vast majority of plastic produced on a global level is single-use plastic. Around 75% of the polymers used is for single-use plastic. As I mentioned before, PVC is one of the polymers that is mainly used for many household items. Even you can find them in the automotive industry, in the construction industry. It has a variety of uses because of its capability to withstand loads and its longevity. However, PVC plastic is one of the most toxic polymers around, and we're going to see this in detail in further slides. So this is a slide that shows the lifespan of some of the most commonly used items. We see here that a single plastic bag takes 20 years to decompose, to totally dissolve in nature. This, especially for plastic straws, just imagine that a plastic straw can be used for 5 minutes. It stays in the environment for more than 200 years, almost more than 2 human life years, let's say. The next is plastic bottles, which stay for 450 years. And what I would like to emphasize is that these items are only used maybe less than 5 minutes, and they stay in the environment for hundreds of years. And this is where all the big issues rise up, because we create these items for our daily use. We use them for maybe a couple of minutes, and then we have to deal with them for the next, I don't know, 400 years. And this is part of why single-use plastics are a very important issue that we need to address. Now, why are plastics a problem? What actually is causing the problem is microplastics and nanoplastics. This is the real culprit, and this is what is creating issues to the environment and to the human health. As a definition, the US National Oceanic Administration and the European Chemicals Agency, they gave a definition of microplastic that are fragments of any plastic less than 5 millimeters. And usually it's a byproduct of larger pieces that break down. Nanoplastics are far smaller, at just 100 nanometers or less, and they are not visible to the naked eye. Most of the times we need microscopes to see them. The problem with these particles is that they can easily enter the water bodies, marine and terrestrial, and falsely mistaken by animals as prey, and they consume them. And this creates either chronic toxicity or acute toxicity, which we'll discuss a little bit in more detail in further slides. And there are also different ways of exposure for these particles. And the most alarming is that these particles are found in many products that they are destined for human consumption. One of the most common items that these particles are found in is sea salt, which contains 0.01 particles per gram. It might not sound much, but actually it is, and we're actually consuming it. Microplastics and nanoplastics are also found in water, beer, and fish. There were a few studies that emerged a few years ago that microplastics and nanoplastics were also found in breastfeeding milk and the placenta. So doctors were very alarmed that this bioaccumulation process takes place, and since then they greatly emphasized on the ways that we can combat this problem, because it has eventually found its way into the human body. Now, this image is what baffled scientists, and on the